Mr. Armstrong, at 39, with quite a few years of flying time ahead of you, what would you expect to be your last space flight?
Well, I have no idea what the future is going to hold for each of us, Walter, but I know that the next 10 years and the next several decades are going to be even more exciting than the past decade.
From Houston, Texas, in color, a special one-hour version of Face the Nation, the first exclusive television interview with the Apollo 11 crew who returned on Thursday from the nationwide tour celebrating their historic first steps on the moon. Millions in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles turned out to greet the returning space pioneers. Now back again in Houston awaiting a world tour, the three astronauts, Mission Commander Neil Armstrong, his colleague in the moonwalk Colonel Edwin E. Aldrin, Jr., and Command Module Pilot Lieutenant Colonel Michael Collins, will be questioned by CBS News correspondent David Shoemaker, Howard Benedict of the Associated Press, and CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite. We shall resume the interview with the astronauts in a moment.
Well, Neil, given, say, 10 more years of actual flight as an astronaut commander, what do you think then, if you had a flight toward the end of that period, you might be doing? What would you say, 10 years? That's 1979.
Well, we've always been poor prophets, Walter. We underestimate. I think we overestimate in a year. We say we're going to do something next year, and we haven't accomplished that much. But if you look ahead 10 years, then you find out that our ability to correctly prophesy is always undershooting. We do much more in 10 years than we'd expect. And if we judge that will probably be true, then I think that in 10 years we'll be looking at the planets.
Colonel Aldrin, next month a task force is going to make recommendations to President Nixon about what our goals should be in space in the next decade. If you were writing those recommendations, what would you suggest? What would you like to see done?
Howard, I think we've laid the foundation for a very logical approach toward these goals. We have many opportunities in continued lunar exploration. I think we're just scratching the surface, so to speak, as to what we can obtain from many of the Earth orbital space station studies and applications toward Earth resources. And certainly, I think economical means of ferrying vehicles through the use of a space shuttle of some sort. These are the type things that we will probably be very interested in exploring. And of course, the eventual exploration beyond the moon towards some of the planets, I think, is something that must be looked into.
Gentlemen, a sort of shorthand target, a description of what we should do next seems to be revolving around Mars, the debate over whether or not this is the time to set a Mars goal. The man you work for, Thomas Paine, the administrator of NASA, says that it looks like 1981 might not be a bad time. On the other hand, another man and men you work for, the House Aeronautical and Space Committee, says that we're not even ready to set such a goal for 10 years or so. Who is right? Are we ready to set a Mars goal or not?
Oh, well, probably both of those gentlemen have had the opportunity to look at more recent analyses than we have, having been tied up 105% of our time on Apollo 11. But I'm quite certain that goals of the Mars variety are within our range should we choose to decide to make that investment of our national resources. I think it's certainly possible, since a planetary trip does always involve a long duration flight, that initial flights to the planets, that is particularly circumplanetary, non-landing but exploratory flights, can be combined with Earth-orbiting spacecraft to develop that long-term capability with the very same type of spacecraft. And so that would certainly be a contender in my view.
Well, one of the important factors, perhaps, according to Wernher von Braun, the most important factor in going to the moon was that a specific date was set, a specific goal was set. Would you today set a specific goal for Mars, and what year would you put on it if you wanted to do that?
I would, and I don't think 1981 is too soon. I think it's well within our capability to do so. And as Neil pointed out, the very nature, the long duration of the trip requires a careful design and testing of the equipment, which could easily be done in Earth orbit with a number of ancillary benefits in terms of Earth resources, observations, and other things which the non-Mars people would propose as well.
Would you agree with 1981?
I certainly think it's well within our capability to be prepared for that date.
Might as well complete the survey.
I'm not so sure that I would agree that this is the time that we can accurately set a date like 1981. I think the setting of a goal is certainly one that we should do, and then as we learn more about this, then I believe that perhaps we can come up with a firm timetable for exactly when we could accomplish
Are
it.
you suggesting, Buzz, then we ought to have an intermediate goal of some kind, the manned space station as an intermediate goal on a timeline?
I would think so. I think we would like to spell out what our complete intentions are, and to set these goals in an intermediate way, and then as we reach these intermediate goals, then I believe we'll be able to better define exactly what our longer term goals are in terms of 10 years from now. I think it's very difficult to make estimates at this time for something as difficult and as complex and as time-consuming as a Mars trip.
You open up in that answer another question. In going to the moon, when the goal was set in '61 to go to the moon, we really didn't know how we were going there yet. I mean, the technique of going there hadn't been decided at the time that the goal was set. Do you see clearly the technique for going to the moon, going to Mars, or are we going to have to debate the means of getting there? Is it just a matter of funding and we know how to do it, or do we have to start it from scratch and going to Mars now?
Well, we know how to go to Mars. Clearly, our recent unmanned observations of Mars have shown that we know how to go there, and I think we can equally well return. There are some variations in the method that might be used with specific details as to the booster used and so on, but I should suspect that would be pretty well known.
Excuse me.
Methods.
Well, I just wanted to pursue that. Then you mean if you use the comparison of the unmanned flyby, then we would go on a single trip from Earth. You wouldn't use a manned space station as an intermediate point in going to Mars.
You might very well use an intermediate point. I meant to imply that the navigation, the method of the traverse, the geometry of the trajectory is known, and
What about the problem of living for a long time in space? Do we have to determine whether man really can survive for months on end in space? Based on your experience, you probably are happy to get out after 8 days.
Well, I should say, Howard, that I certainly enjoyed the entire trip, and I had no hesitation at all about living in that environment for a considerably longer period of time. Now, the question that you raise about the duration of the mission is one that our forthcoming flights, Apollo application series, will start to answer, and certainly the next step beyond that is going to require longer duration experiments, probably first in Earth orbit, to determine if there are any limiting criteria that that will stop what we think might be possible.
Of course, it was easy for you, Neil. You and Buzz got out and walked around, got a lot of exercise. Mike sat there for the whole time in Columbia, the command module. Let him answer that. Were you comfortable for 8 days?
Well, as a lazy man, I can say I was very comfortable. And Further, I feel that you're quite right, Howard. The medical implications must clearly be understood before we commit to setting sail to Mars. But fortunately, the Earth orbital environment is the same as it would be on the trip to Mars and coming back, and I think that's a question that is easily answered. I think the medical aspects of it are perhaps of less concern than some of the engineering difficulties in designing equipment whose reliability is sufficiently high to guarantee that you're willing to take the extremely long duration that's necessary for the entire trip.
Well, we are going to have to take a much larger spacecraft to Mars. Certainly your creature comforts are going to have to be a great deal better than they are in the Apollo command module, as fine as it is.
Well,
sanitation, just for one thing.
I would expect so. I would expect that the design of these vehicles would place much more emphasis upon the off-duty hours than did the Gemini or the Apollo, which pays virtually no attention to that. You're really on duty 24 hours a day in our present vehicles.
Let me ask you a very practical question, if somewhat veiled. Would you want to be gone from your wives and families for a year or two on a Mars trip? Would you, Neil Armstrong, want to take a trip of that length?
Well, I'd like to take a trip of that length, and perhaps Walter's suggestion of a considerably larger vehicle would allow us to take the families along.
But those would have to be the conditions for you personally?
Oh, no, I think not, and certainly there's a lot of historical precedent. The old sailing ships certainly went out for long periods. Even our present maritime vehicles, fishermen from various parts of the world and many of our seagoing colleagues spend extended periods at sea without their families, and I think that's perfectly practical to extend that kind of motivation into our efforts.
We've been sitting here just assuming...
Madison Avenue commuters in New York who don't get home for 2 years at a time.
We've just been assuming that it's logical to go to Mars, and yet the unmanned probe shows that it's really not that much different, apparently, than the Moon. Why even bother with everything else there is to do, particularly here on Earth?
Well, we do have and will continue to have an unquenchable curiosity to understand our solar system. And I'm quite sure that now that we believe that's within our means to look, we will. And it's just a matter of time now. It's when will you do it, not whether you will do it. Now, assuming that it will be done, and it will be done at some point, then it's just a question of what is the order and so on. And I think it's important to say that a spacecraft that is able to fly to Mars, that's able to transfer itself around between planets, that same spacecraft can probably go to nearly any of the nearby planets. The same configuration, the same type of spacecraft. So such an exploring vehicle would not be limited just to what we know about Mars. It'd be more a truth-searching vehicle that could go to many of the planets and find out things of substance.
You say we have an unquenchable desire to know, but yet, according to the most recent survey, still just barely more than 50% of the people think that space is one of those major areas in which the budget can be cut. Is that discouraging to you after...
David, let's get into that in just a moment, if we might. We'll be back in just a moment.
NASA has scheduled 9 more moon landing flights over the next 3 years. And they aren't too much different from what yours are, because we're limited to what time we can spend on the moon and so on. And I'm often asked, why spend $400 million a shot just to go up and do some scientific research, bring back some rocks? How can we justify these other 9 flights for the public? And do you think perhaps maybe after 4 or 5 we will learn enough that we could cut them off and maybe aim for building a moon base, something like that?
Well, it doesn't seem logical to me that a businessman would build a factory and then turn out his first prototype product and say, now I'm going to close down the plant. And you look from an overall view, that doesn't seem to be a very profitable approach to good business. Similarly, I don't think it would be a good approach for us to build up this
this capability of flying to the moon and be satisfied with only the first small product. I think since the overwhelming majority of the expenditure has already been made in terms of the developments of the plants and the people and the boosters, they're built, the spacecraft are built, they're ready to fly. The amount of money required to continue the completion of the program is very small.
Well, couldn't the hardware be used, say, if you took the last 4 moon landing flights off, couldn't the hardware be used for building a base on the moon and get an early start on it?
Well, I haven't had the opportunity to investigate closely that kind of a proposal, but I'm certainly sure that we will always reevaluate each individual flight. As you know, we've made a large number of changes in the past in our schedules and the objectives for each schedule based on the fact that we're always a little bit smarter this week than we were last week, and there's certain times when it's appropriate to change your mind and change your goals slightly. And I would suspect that certain of those changes we will see during the forthcoming completion of the 9 flights that you mentioned. However, in general, I would think the overall objective, that of doing essentially a survey of the most important scientific areas of the moon is appropriate.
At what point do the flights to the moon pass the division point between being primarily engineering and go over to primarily scientific? I mean, obviously the first flight is an engineering flight. You've got to prove that you can get there and do the job. And there must be more refinement of that. How far can you move beyond the base, and how long can you stay, and things of that kind. At what point does it pass that division between engineering and science?
I think it'd be a gradual transition, and I would fully expect many of these transitions into more scientific investigations to be coming up on the Apollo 12 flight. I think that we'll have the time between each mission to find out just what new things can be done on the surface, and we'll be looking ahead 1, 2, or 3 missions and trying to capitalize as much as we possibly can on what's been learned from the previous flights.
There's been a certain amount of controversy developed in recent weeks, although it's been continuing for longer than that, I'm sure, behind the scenes, over this matter of science versus engineering in the flights. The crews have now been assigned for Apollo 12, 13, and 14. On 13 and 14, the rookie astronauts there are even less senior. They are junior to some of the scientist astronauts. That, plus the resignation of Wilmot Hess, the chief scientist, has prompted a former astronaut, scientist astronaut, Brian O'Leary, to say that the gap between science and engineering is widening, and scientists are coming out on the short end. Is that true, or what is your reaction to that?
Well, I think that probably we have not done as much pure science as many people would have liked on our initial flights. We think that's justifiable based on the fact that first you must in fact demonstrate that it's possible, and every practical bit of your energy should be directed toward first having a safe, successful flight. I think that we will continue to incorporate more and more science into these flights. The plans seem to indicate that, and based on our experience on the lunar surface, we think it's now a good bit more practical to perform some of the things that were previously questioned. If you remember, just immediately prior to the flight of Apollo 11, there was a certain group of the scientific community that was very critical of our putting men on the moon, with the contention that we would be completely unable to perform in that environment, and that we were in fact endangering our own safety by the attempt. well, as you know, we fortunately found that that was not a fact. As a matter of fact, just the opposite is true. We were able to work readily and to, in fact, enjoy ourselves while we were doing it. Consequently, we're encouraged to believe that an increasing amount of science can be performed on the lunar surface. That was certainly one of the most enjoyable parts of Apollo 11, and I'm sure that those crew members after us, 12 and 13, will have even higher degree of success in terms of the scientific objectives of the flight.
Do you think they can really move out now on the basis of what you have learned in Apollo 11? What are you able to tell them about how far away from the base they can get and how long they can stay out? Of course, they're limited by the portable life support system and how long they can stay out. But how many trips could they make out? How long could they work out there and so forth? What are your recommendations on that?
Well, we have told the Apollo 12 crew that we think it's reasonable to go a good bit farther than we ventured, and perhaps a half mile or a mile. The limitation here is one of being able to return to the lunar module should you have a failure in the backpack. And that will be true whether we're walking or flying around the moon or going around on jeeps. That same limitation will probably be true, and we suspect, though, that with improvements in the backpacks and our emergency oxygen and so on in say a very few number of flights, why we'll be able to do substantially more than we would guess now.
We'll be back in just a moment. Howard, did you have a question?
I think, Walter, we ought to explore some of the momentous flight that we've just gone through. I would like to talk especially about the descent stage. You had some pretty hair-raising moments on those final 50,000 feet, especially the final few thousand. You had computer alarms flashing. You had to take manual control to avoid a crater. You were running low on fuel. The dust was kicking up and obscuring your visibility. And Dr. Payne has said that if it hadn't been for the ground, you might have had to abort the landing. Could you give us your feelings on that? If you had no input from the ground, would you have had to abort, or could you have gone in and landed?
I should think we would have tried to continue. Now, our basic approach is to keep continuing until you see that it's either going to be impossible to complete the landing or until you're running into a dangerous situation. In this case, we may have been able to continue, and we certainly would have tried until one of those boundaries was reached. You'd do so with considerably less confidence than you would, however, with everything operating as you'd hoped.
Well, now, there are mission rules, but did you and Buzz have your own personal go, no-go point? When were you going to get out of there?
Well, we would not leave until we either had inadequate fuel to complete the landing or that the trajectory itself was unsatisfactory. That is, the descent rate or the altitude, the combination of velocity and altitude and so on would have precluded a successful landing.
There's an awful lot of pressure on you in this situation. Here's the whole 10 years and the whole 24 billion or whatever it is at stake. Is there almost a feeling that this is a do-or-die situation for you two? Did you consider that at all or think that way?
I don't believe so. We're very much interested in the items of the moment and solving those particular problems as they come up. Now we did have some communications difficulty, which occupied a good bit of our time early in the descent. The program alarms that occurred later on as we were passing the 5-6 minute point, the major effect of these was to deny us displays that were available to us on the keyboard. At the same time, we did have displays going to various instruments on the instrument panel, which were giving us essentially the same information. So this momentary overcrowding of the computer was one of a bothersome nature, which forced us to investigate, to find the source of the difficulty, and then to proceed past it.
Here you guys go again. It's just another flight.
Well, now just a minute here. Yeah, let's get into this a little more. You say first you investigate. You're on a split-second situation. We've seen the film. I mean, we have been able to share this with you in a sense. You know, you're coming down pretty doggone fast. It's faster than announcer can kind of keep up with it, even yourselves in telling about it. You can't tell everything that happened. Here's a split-second decision. I don't understand it. You've got a computer here that is out now. Is that it? I mean, it's not functioning.
No, the computer was continuing to give us information, and then a light comes on and says, program alarm. Well, since we don't know the source of this alarm, and it could be a serious one, it requires that we interrogate the computer through various keystrokes to find out what this is.
Wait, just right there a minute, Buzz. You're coming down woo, toward the moon, and you're going to interrogate the... Hey, please, Mr. Computer, what are you doing there, Mr. Computer? Interrogate the computer?
Walter, this is something that's done of normal course. During a normal descent, as soon as the radar would lock on, and this would be indicated by the change of status lights, we would then interrogate the computer to find out the difference between the altitude reading that the computer had and that information that was being fed into it by the radar. And this was not being incorporated in to improve our knowledge of where we are until we tell it to start making use of this radar information. Now, in doing this, we have to interrogate the computer with a verb, a noun,
this
and
is
so
punching
forth.
things
Punching into the
two or three
keyboard.
punches.
We're continuing,
All right, now, you know
continuously
you're
doing
going to be
this.
long, and Neil, you're looking out the window, and all of a sudden you're already long, and there is a boulder field in the middle of a crater that you got to add more fuel to, and you're already a little concerned about fuel. Didn't you even look over at Buzz and say, wow, or anything? I mean, like this is going to be a hairy one.
No, we did just what we had been practicing to do in the months and months prior to the flight. I did all the looking out the window to judge whether or not this would be a satisfactory area. Buzz concentrated all his information inside the cockpit to not just the operation of the computer, but also doing his own jobs of display monitoring, plus the ones that I normally do, and feeding me information from inside, and worked like a charm. And we can't give enough credit to the people on the ground who were able to add a little confidence to the situation by their timely judgments as to the actual illness of the computer, if any. And essentially they were telling us the computer really isn't ill, it's just got some symptoms.
Well, were you frightened at all, and did you think abort at any time?
No, I think we were a good ways away from a condition that would require an abort. When these program alarms were coming up, at least in the latter ones around 3,000, 2,000 feet, we were quite capable to be able to take over completely, either on the primary guidance system and land manually, or making use of the abort guidance system and a manual throttle.
What about before the flight? Now, today, you're heroes and you're getting ticker tape parades wherever you go. But before the flight, did you ever lose any sleep thinking you might wind up a goat after all this?
I think we like to look at the positive side of things.
Oh, come on. What was the pressure before the flight? The thought that you could blow it all.
Well, we were, of course, concerned primarily for the success of the flight. And we did not want to come back without having landed. That's certainly true.
Can you clarify that?
But we were certainly willing to do that, and that would certainly be much better than not coming back at all. So we were resigned to the fact that if it was impossible to land, we just wouldn't land. We'd come back.
Now that we have you on the surface of the moon, if we could consider some of the problems there, you were not able to take your documented sample. In retrospect, do you think it was a mistake to have all of the sort of formal program at the beginning, the flag planting, the presidential exchange of greetings and how do you do's, and have spent a little more time collecting rocks?
Well, I suspect the formal, the few minutes we spent in the formal ceremonies there was far less degrading to our overall service activity than our awe of the situation and our interest in looking around at the moon and spending more time in rocks and craters that we were genuinely interested in. And we were certainly guilty of enjoying that first half hour.
Neil, about that awe, let me suggest a couple of possibilities here, see if you confirm it for us. Was your excitement level kind of high, and did you, well, I'm sure your excitement level was high, but was it so high that you forgot the words that you had decided you were going to say and not put the in there, and the first step for a man or first step for man? And second of all, as I understood the flight plan, you were supposed to get down there, and the first thing was a contingency sample rock. Apparently you were and all, and were looking at your vehicle, and Buzz, I think, or the ground, I wasn't sure where the words came from, reminded you of the contingency sample, and you said you were getting to it. You're going to get there in a minute. I just wondered if maybe there was kind of a momentary excitement level that led to these two things.
Well, with regard to the first, I can't confirm the words. I knew what my intentions were, and I thought I said those words. I can't prove that. With respect to the contingency sample, that was a definite change in plan that was decided at the time. Due to the yaw angle and shadow location of the spacecraft, it looked like it would be more profitable to reverse the order of the camera descent to the surface in the contingency sample, because I wanted to get the contingency sample in an area that had not been washed with the exhaust and contaminated with the exhaust of the engine. Also, I wanted to get it in an area of sunlight where I could see what the sample was. And that was fairly far away from where I was at the location. And it looked to be more expedient to get the camera while I was in the shadow and then take the contingency sample in sunlight.
For those who might have missed the earlier chapters of this story, the contingency sample was the very first sample of rock, totally unexamined, that you were going to take with that long scoop and put in your overall pocket there.
Speaking of gathering rocks, do you believe that the geology training you had before you went up was adequate for the job you had to do? And what have the geologists and scientists said about the material that you brought back? Were they happy with it?
I certainly feel that the geology training that we had was adequate for our mission. I think we want to expand this in specific areas for future missions, depending on what their particular investigation is going to be.
I want to go back, Walter, to the statement that you made when you set foot on the moon. I was entirely satisfied with it, Neil, and it made sense to me just the way it sounded. Did somebody convince you that you had made an error in grammar?
No.
Or had you actually
someone
intended to say a step for a man?
Someone asked me what I said, and I told them what I said, and they said, well, that isn't the way the transcription came out. And that was my
If you'll recall, I made reference to what Neil had said on one of the television shows on the way back, and my recollection was that's a small step for a man.
Speaking of things now that people say, what is your reaction to this? It's either threatened or actually filed court suit now by Madalyn Murray O'Hair to prevent astronauts from propagandizing God, I guess, in their transmissions from space.
Well, I think we ought to say a little prayer, and maybe she will see the light.
It's gotten a little more serious than that in a way. She brought up, as you know, Neil, in an article in Die Sturm, the German magazine, saying that you're an atheist. I don't really know what that has to do with your ability as a test pilot and an astronaut, but since the matter is up, would you like to answer that statement?
I don't know where Mrs. O'Hare gets her information. She certainly didn't bother to inquire of me, nor apparently the agency. And I'm certainly not an atheist.
Well, apparently, your application simply says no religious preference or something like that on your personnel file. The agency says
that's agency nomenclature, which means that you don't have a acknowledged identification with or association with a particular church group at the time. I did not.
That takes care of that question. I think, hope to the satisfaction of Stern Magazine and Madeline Murray O'Hare.
All right.
We'll be back in just a moment. Mike, I was wondering when we were talking about aborting on the landing on the moon, about that moment when docking took place. I thought at the news conference here in Houston earlier last week, you kind of glossed over this episode maybe a little bit of the problem in docking. I was thinking of it more from a human standpoint, your own standpoint. Here you were, you're the guardian angel over this whole operation, and that docking has got to come, right? And you've been sitting there really kind of up for the game. You're going to go in and kick that field goal, on that last minute. And here in that last minute, suddenly, your foot would seem to slip.
Not quite that important.
I mean, did you feel that way at all?
I think more the feeling of you finally grabbed a hold of this errant child, and now he's kicking and struggling a little bit, and you know you still have him, but you haven't quite gotten him into the bathtub yet. It's more of that feeling. It was a minor thing, a surprise, but a matter really of very little importance. There just was a small gyration or oscillation which developed between the two vehicles, which was a surprise, due, I think, primarily to the fact that for the first time we had an extremely light LEM, and the dynamics of the two vehicles were somewhat different than we would have expected. But as I say, it was not a major problem in any sense.
Well, you said at the news conference also that when rendezvous took place, you thought for the first time you might really pull this thing off. Did you have a feeling at that moment of docking that, oh my gosh, maybe we won't pull this thing off?
No, not that much. I thought perhaps I would, at worst, I would have to release the LEM and go back and initiate the docking process over again.
There wasn't any concern that damage had been done in that oscillation in the docking tunnel?
That thought flashed through my mind, but it wasn't really that bad. The vehicles are flexibly bound together, but even though they bend, there's very little chance to actually incur any structural damage which would prevent a successful docking. Glad to see that. Of course, we always have in our hip pocket the method of bringing Neil and Buzz around through an extravehicular transfer and in through the side hatch. It's a cumbersome procedure, and it would have been rather difficult with the rock boxes, but as I say, we always like to keep something in our hip pocket in the event of trouble.
Mike, I'd like to ask one just small personal question. Are you going to get tired of hearing them talk about walking on the moon before this series of tours is over?
Not at all. I'm enjoying it very much. As you know, I was over on the backside of the moon for half their walk, and I kept coming around the front side, with the what they say, what are they doing attitude, and I'm very happy to have them fill me in on those details now.
Seems to me another problem you had, or it may be a major problem for the Apollo program, is the overshoot. When you were coming in for the descent, you were several miles beyond your target. Same thing happened to Apollo 10 on its approach to the moon. Is this problem understood, especially for future flights where you'll have to make pinpoint landings into craters and places like that? Do you understand it now?
Well, I think that we knew before the flight that we would have certain difficulty in hitting precisely the center of the footprint area that we were shooting for. It's a difficult procedure to control the trajectory of the spacecraft very accurately and start the descent at the proper point over the lunar surface. But with every flight, we're improving our knowledge and understanding of that, and I think that we can expect good luck on it hitting a particular spot on the moon in the future landings.
How are you going to increase the duration of your stay, or particularly your activity on the lunar surface, if you're not able to sleep in the LEM?
I think we will be able to sleep in the LEM. We were not able to do that very well because of a number of factors that we did not spend adequate time on before flight. The temperature control of the LEM while it was sitting on the moon, that is the temperature in the cabin, the noise in the cabin, and the lighting in the cabin. All those are things that we can fix now that we understand that they're very likely to keep you from sleeping, and I expect that we'll be able to solve that problem.
Can they be fixed for 12, that early?
I would think that an appreciable percentage of them will be fixed for 12.
I think the lighting level will be very easy to fix, to make the shade more opaque, so it'll let less light in. They are working on a restraint system, a hammock sort of arrangement that will enable both crew members to be a good bit more comfortable, perhaps, than we were.
With 1/6 gravity, do you need a restraint system? Or does that 1/6 of your weight keep you pretty stable?
Well, I found just lying along on the floor was quite comfortable. Now, there's really only one flat location, or nearly flat location in the LEM. Now, in order to be able to stretch out, some other provision must be made to support your legs or your head. Something like a hammock looks promising.
When you talk about restraints, what you really mean is just something to lie on, a hammock.
Yes.
It's not a restraint against weightlessness.
Would you expect in future missions that it will be necessary to quarantine the crews on return, or have we seen the last of that?
I think the protocol calls for a quarantine similar to ours for several additional flights until sufficient evidence, statistical evidence from a variety of lunar surface locations proves the point to the satisfaction of those people in the government that bear the responsibility for the safety of our public.
Well, now, there seems to be everybody says this is necessary, and they go, ha, ha, ha. Is it really ha, ha, ha? What do you think?
Well, we have no way of laughing, I don't think. The chances of our bringing anything back are extremely remote, but nonetheless, the number is not zero. It approaches zero, but it's not zero, and until you can adequately determine that it was zero, I think you have to take these precautions, and we certainly didn't ha-ha-ha anywhere along the line.
Don't you think the quarantine might be broken just by the fact that you opened the hatch out in the Pacific? And if there were any bugs, they could have gotten out in that period?
The pre-flight planning for that particular event more or less precludes that as a possibility, since that air within the command module cockpit is recirculated so many times through filter systems on all the way back from the moon to the Earth, and the statistical probability of a lunar pathogen, a bug, getting outside under those conditions is so remote as to be probably not worthy of consideration. In addition, we did a good bit of cleaning of the spacecraft in a vacuum cleaner fashion, and all the nooks, crannies, and crevices to even improve that.
There are always a certain number of housekeeping questions we have to ask astronauts when they return from flights. For instance, do all of you, and I'd like an answer from each of you, do you expect to fly again? Do you expect to continue to be active astronauts?
I expect to continue in the program. Just whether I'll remain on flight status or not, I haven't had the opportunity to make that decision yet, and we have not been rushed into making up our mind just what we'd like to do.
I'm available to serve in any capacity that they feel I can contribute best to our
Well, would you
objective.
think now that you're too valuable as, let's say, a public relations tool to let you fly again?
Well, I would certainly hope that my technical abilities are the things that I will use most.
Will you fly again, Mike?
Well, Apollo 11 was my last flight, but not for any reasons that I feel that I'm too valuable or anything at all. It's just that I think it's difficult to keep up year after year to really approach the training, the living in the simulators, and to approach the training with the zeal that you have to in order to do a good job. And of course, there are a lot of encroachments on my family life, which I have not enjoyed. And in view of all those things, I intend to contribute whatever I can to the space program in some other capacity. I don't know what that'll be, but right now it's going to consist of going on vacation.
Well, will you stay in NASA?
Well, I'd like to very much.
Mike, you said at one time before the flight that you'd take whatever measures were necessary to assure some privacy in your life in the future. How extreme do you think the measures are going to have to be, and what do you have in mind?
Yeah, I don't know, Walter. That's a good question, and one I'm poorly equipped to answer, but I tried growing a mustache. That wasn't the answer.
Who ordered the mustache off? Your wife, I hear, huh?
That's the current rumor, Walter. I think you ought to ask her about that.
Well, it's too bad it was lost, because we did have a first there, the first mustache grown as man orbited the moon. And it would have been nice if, I think we could have preserved it. You could have stood there at the Smithsonian and shown people your mustache. Well, we all feel honored that we've had the privilege of having you with us today and answering these questions, the crew of historic Apollo 11. Thank you very much for being with us on Face the Nation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Today on Face the Nation, the crew of Apollo 11, Mission Commander Neil Armstrong, Colonel Edwin E. Aldrin, Jr., and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Collins were interviewed by CBS News correspondent David Shoemaker, Howard Benedict of the Associated Press, and CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite. Next week, another prominent figure in the news will face the nation. Face the Nation originated today in color from Houston, Texas, through the facilities of KHOU TV.